Let me introduce our next speaker, Dr. Mike Ozner, and Mike's going to be speaking for his international program today. And Dr. Ozner, welcome again.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here, and we're delighted to have this conference. We literally had to close registration. We had so many cardiologists and physicians from not only around the United States, but from around the world who wanted to attend, that we actually ran out of room. And so it's amazing how this whole concept of prevention has taken hold. And I could tell you, when I started my practice back in 1979, I finished my cardiology fellowship at Stanford, came back to Miami, where I'm from. In fact, I was born probably 3 miles from here at St. Francis Hospital. And I came back here. I could tell you across the country, if somebody had a heart attack while they were recovering in the coronary care unit, prevention consisted of a beta blocker, a baby aspirin, bed rest, maybe a little chicken soup, and that was it. There was no such thing as a prevention strategy. Well, I could tell you we've come light years since that time. And that's what I'm going to discuss today. How you can make yourself heart attack proof, how you can build a shield around yourself and make yourself bulletproof. So buckle your seatbelts, because I'm going to take you through my heart attack proof strategy, and I've given this lecture around the country and around the world. What I'd like for all of you to do right now is to turn and look at the person sitting right next to you, okay? Because one of you is going to die from this condition right here, okay? One of you will die from this condition. And what's this condition? This is an atherosclerotic plaque. So here's an artery, here's your plaque, and guess what? This plaque has ruptured. And when it ruptures, you develop a clot or a thrombus that shuts off blood supply. So, like Tim Russert, you could just be walking down the street, feeling fine, and then boom, the plaque ruptures. And most of the plaques that rupture are small plaques, tiny plaques. It's not what we thought of the 90% blockage. And they're like rattlesnakes. And when they strike quickly and often without warning. That's the bad news. 1 out of 2 of you will die from this disease. If it happens in the heart, we're talking about a heart attack. In the brain, a stroke, peripheral vascular catastrophes. But it doesn't have to be that way. And what I'm having over the next 4 days is the brightest minds in cardiology. And we're going to discuss new ways of reaching the promised land, which is to prevent this disease. And I believe that we are knocking on the door, and we could make you virtually heart attack proof. This gentleman, which most of you remember, he was very dynamic. Tim Russert, as you know, was an NBC reporter. Clearly he was, in quotes, in pretty good shape. He had some medical issues, what we call metabolic syndrome, and his cholesterol was a little high, but his LDL cholesterol, so-called bad cholesterol, was under control. It was actually quite good. And his stress test was normal. So one day in the newsroom, about 1:30 p.m., he gets up from his desk, clutches his chest, falls down, and drops dead from a sudden heart attack, sudden cardiac death. How could that be, everybody asks, with his cholesterol being normal? Well, we know the answer to that. Things have changed. You know, in the dark ages, we got a so-called lipid panel, a total cholesterol and a good cholesterol and a bad cholesterol. You could throw that out the window, because what we know now is it's not cholesterol. There is no such thing as a good cholesterol or a bad cholesterol. There are particles that carry cholesterol through the bloodstream, and there are good particles and bad particles. And when you measure cholesterol, you might as well just flip a coin. We should be measuring not LDL-C, but LDL-P, standing for the number of bad particles floating in the bloodstream. You know, are we doing that today? No, we're not. What's the excuse? Well, it costs a lot of money to do that. The amount of money is about 35 cents to measure an LDLP and keep people out of the hospital and out of the emergency room and out of the cath lab and out of the open heart theater. Now, I could also tell you that stress tests have been around forever. Stress tests are notoriously unreliable. Why? Because most of these plaques, like I showed you, that rupture are little 5%, 10% plaques. I liken the word plaque to like a pimple in the artery wall. And it's the small ones that are highly inflamed are the ones that are most likely to rupture. So my first order of business is to make all of you honorary cardiologists. So before you leave, we're going to give you your honorary cardiology degree, and Brian and Tin will award you. So this is your cardiology fellowship, and it'll take 30 seconds. So pay attention here. So here's an artery in the body. It could be any artery. And coursing through the artery are these particles in yellow. These are the particles that carry cholesterol. Cholesterol is the innocent bystander. And these particles, when there's too many of them, they get into the wall of the artery, and they're taken up by inflammatory cells that you see here, and this is what causes the atherosclerotic plaque. It's an inflammatory process that develops, and if that were all that it was, then atherosclerosis would be a benign condition. However, as we go forward, we then see that these plaques, these inflammatory cells, become the bad player. And they start releasing all kinds of noxious agents like proteinases that break down the lining of this plaque. And it, again, is like a pimple or a boil in the artery wall. So here's a patient, and of course, this is a small plaque, so it doesn't disrupt blood flow. And here's a patient, Max, who's in at the Atlanta airport with a hot dog in this hand and a cigarette in this hand, running to catch his next flight. And all of a sudden, these proteinases cause the plaque to rupture. Blood comes into the plaque, mixes with the tissue factor of the plaque, and you develop a sudden and often catastrophic clot, and it stops you in your tracks. And if you're lucky enough, you'll get to the hospital in time, but most of the people, over half the people, don't even make it to the hospital. They die before reaching care. Again, this was our old concept that we started to obstruct the lesion with these plaques from the get-go until we choked off the artery and we had a heart attack. Wrong, wrong, wrong. For decades, that was the idea. We now understand that this is not a plumbing process. Most of this plaque occurs and stays in the wall of the artery without projecting into the lumen. And why is that so important that we understand that? Because this plaque right here, which you'd have a normal stress test with this plaque, doesn't disrupt blood flow. If you had a heart catheterization, it would look perfectly normal. But this plaque, if it ruptures and you form a clot, can kill you just as quickly as the 90% blockage. That understanding was critical. I love analogies. I liken this to a volcano. So let's say you were traveling and you went to an island and there was a volcano. Here's the question. Would you be able to predict whether that volcano would erupt based on how big it was? And the answer is no. For any of you that studied volcanology, you'll know that it has nothing to do with the size of the volcano. It has everything to do with what's underneath the surface, right? Likewise, in our vascular bed, it has nothing to do with the size of the plaque. These concepts that I've heard for years, oh my gosh, Papa's got a 90% blockage, let's get him to the operating room quickly before he has a heart attack if it goes another 10%, was incorrect. We were working on the wrong model. And that's why, despite the billions and billions, and I may say trillions of dollars that we have spent on cardiovascular care, we were no healthier in this country in terms of cardiovascular wellness than in countries like Canada or Sweden that spent a fraction of what we spent. Because although intervention is of critical